My name is Jean-Claude Olivier. I am a senior housing inspector with code enforcement. I currently supervise the hearing sections here at Housing and also work with the Home Sharing Investigation and Enforcement Unit. Today we'll be going over the exterior elevated elements, also known as EEE or E3, or the balcony inspection law for apartment buildings. And as Laura stated, this presentation will be emailed out to you. But by all means, if you have any questions, please jot them down. We will do a question and answer session after I run through the PowerPoint. So please do, as I go through this presentation, write down any questions that you want to ask at the end. So just a quick disclaimer, this presentation is for educational purposes only. Any information provided in this presentation is not intended or implied to be a substitute for professional or legal advice, nor does it supersede the applicable laws. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information is for general information purposes only. Opinions or points of view expressed in this presentation represent the view of the presenter and does not necessarily represent the official position or policies. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained from or through this presentation with other sources and review all information regarding any related building standard conditions with your licensed design professional. So a quick overview for today, we will go over a brief introduction to the SCEP and complaint inspection process, why the exterior elevated elements EEE or E3 inspection law was enacted, the law itself, and requirements of the law. So a quick background on the SCEP and complaint inspection process. In our city, we have roughly 3.9 million people, of which 60% are renters. And throughout the city, we have over 800,000 rental units. In response to the Blue Ribbon Committee's findings on dilapidated housing stock, the Systematic Enforcement Program, SCEP, began in 1998. The Los Angeles Housing Department, LAHD, is responsible for conducting SCEP and complaint response inspections of the city's multifamily rental housing. SCEP inspections. The purpose of SCEP inspections is to verify that existing residential rental properties, buildings, units, and structures comply with the applicable provisions of laws, regulations, codes set forth in the Los Angeles Housing Code as to maintenance, sanitation, ventilation, use, occupancy, and enforcement of those requirements governing any alteration, addition, or repair. SCEP inspections will take place on any property that has at least 2 units on the lot and at least 1 must be rented. And these inspections are set to occur every 4 years, or they could be every 2 years if you're on a shortened cycle, depending on the history of your property, past case loads, and the current conditions. To begin the inspection process starts with a mailing and posting of the inspection notice to the property owner, also to the tenants. So a notice will be mailed out to the property owners depending on what address or to what address is on file with the county assessor's office. It will be posted at the property in a conspicuous area on the common grounds. Also, it will be posted or mailed to the tenants themselves. So if it's posted, it will be posted on their individual doors. If we can verify the individual tenant addresses, we will mail them a copy as well. As we begin the inspection, we will inspect all apartments, common areas, exterior, accessory buildings, everything on the property. If you have a mixed-use property, we will not inspect the commercial spaces. If you live on the property, we will not inspect your unit as well. If we find violations, we'll issue an order. Then we'll conduct a reinspection. If everything's corrected, we'll close the case. If not, we can grant an extension if there's substantial progress on the noted violations. Or after the extensions, or if there's no progress, we will refer the case to a hearing for further enforcement. Complaint inspections are pretty much the same process. The only difference is there is no notification via posting or mailing before the initial inspection. So to begin this process, the complaint is filed online, by phone, or in person by the complainant. They must have access to the unit or to the property, depending on where the violations, they're alleging the violations are. If it's in an area that can be observed from the public right-of-way, the street, the sidewalk, then they don't have to live on the property. Otherwise, they have to meet us at the property and provide access. We'll conduct the inspection as soon as we can after receiving the complaint. And once we're out there, we'll issue an order if we find violations. If not, we'll close the case. Violations are found, we'll conduct a reinspection, and after the fact, close the case once the violations are corrected. And it's the same process. We can grant an extension if there's just cause, or refer the case to a general manager's hearing for non-compliance. If we receive an urgent complaint, these we try to schedule as soon as possible, at least within 72 hours, we will try to schedule that complaint. So let's get into SB 721, the balcony inspection law. This began due to the Berkeley incident. The Berkeley incident was a catastrophic balcony failure that occurred in Berkeley, California in June of 2015. The balcony failure resulted in injuries and loss of six lives. In the contractor's state license board's accusation against the contractor who worked on the building, the board alleged that the floor joists installed on the balcony of the affected unit were not pressure treated, and that instead of the plywood called for in the design plans, a thinner composite material was used. In addition, a subcontractor hired by the contractor to waterproof the balcony did not install a membrane that would have made it waterproof. We see in the picture on the right, the result of that balcony failure. It fell right down to the balcony down below, and unfortunately, lives were lost that day. This is a photo from the front elevation showing the damage. And we have another up close of those dry rotted floor joists where the balcony failed. Now, although the balcony inspection law, SB 721, resulted mainly due to the Berkeley incident in 2015, unfortunately, that was not an isolated event. As we see from these headlines, it has become a trend across the nation in various cities. So again, as a result of that balcony failure in Berkeley, the California Health and Safety Code section 18924.5 was added, which required that the California Building Standards Commission to form a working group to review available documents and reports, including forensic reports and studies relied upon in the development of the national and state building codes, and any other available material related to the construction and maintenance of exterior elevated elements. The working group was tasked with assisting in the development of a report to appropriate policy committees of the legislature by January 1st of 2018. The report would include findings, possible recommendations for changes in law, and/or amendments to the California Building Standards Code. The working group report, one of the key findings is finding number 8, which states periodic post-occupancy inspection is critical to preventing the failure of existing EEEs. Again, that's exterior elevated elements. As such, there needs to be post-occupancy inspection, and the requirement for this post-occupancy inspection needs to be strengthened. We recommend that state agencies encourage local jurisdictions to implement a periodic post-occupancy inspection program for EEEs. Legislation may be required to allow state agencies to implement such local programs. We would encourage the legislature to write the enabling legislation in a way to allow the appropriate agencies to develop these programs rather than having the program set forth in detail in the legislation. SB 721 includes the post-occupancy periodic inspection recommended by the working group by adding section 17973 to the California Health and Safety Code. This bill establishes inspection and repair requirements for exterior elevated elements, EEEs as defined, including decks and balconies, for buildings with 3 or more multifamily dwelling units, establishes reporting and repair requirements if repairs are needed, including specific timelines for carrying out the repairs, specifies who can complete the inspections and repairs, and provides for civil penalties for violations for building owners as specified. Section 17973 to the California Health and Safety Code was codified in the state housing law. Again, this is commonly known as EEE or E3 or the balcony inspection law. It defines the scope of the law and its requirements and how to comply with the law. So why are these periodic inspections required? The purpose of the inspection is to determine that exterior elevated elements and their associated waterproofing elements are in a generally safe condition, adequate working order, and free from any hazardous condition caused by fungus, deterioration, decay, or improper alteration to the extent that the life, limb, health, property, safety, or welfare of the public or the occupants is not endangered. So here's just some examples of why these inspections are needed. This is the underneath of a balcony walkway. I'm sure if you are standing next to this guardrail, you may be able to feel a soft spot right here, but had the stucco not been removed, you wouldn't know the extent of the dry rot underneath, and eventually this would lead to a catastrophic failure. And we just see more examples of dry rot throughout, perhaps due to improper weatherproofing or just deferred maintenance over the years. And although it seems drastic, eventually if it goes unnoticed or unmaintained, this is ultimately the result. So how do you know if your building requires this balcony inspection or an inspection under the Senate Bill 721? Follow this flow chart. First, does your building have 3 or more units? If no, then we could stop right there. No E3 inspections required. Now note it says building, not property. So if you have 5 units at your property, you may need the inspection. However, it all depends on the composition of the building or buildings on that property. So if you have 5 units and they're all single family dwellings, you would not need this inspection. If you have 4 units and your property is comprised of 2 duplexes, you would not need this inspection. The requirement is triggered when you have at least 1 building with 3 or more units. So yes, we have 1 building with 3 or more units. Now, does your building have wood frame exterior elevated elements? No. If it's just steel and concrete, then you don't need this inspection. But if it's like most buildings in the city, you will have some form of wood frame construction or support of these elevated elements by wood frame construction, then yes, you will need the inspection. So we can continue on. Now, is your building classified as an apartment building? If that's a no, then doesn't mean you don't need the inspection, but you will follow different requirements and contact the building and safety department for enforcement on that. Now, apartment building is pretty vague. So your certificate of occupancy may not say apartment building, it may say SFD, but again, this factor here is to determine jurisdiction. So think about what requires us to perform a SCEP inspection at your property. Do you have at least 2 or more units at your property where one is rented? If so, then the housing department would continue and you would continue on to this last step, conduct your inspection, and the results would be reviewed and sent to us. But if you own or manage condominiums, commercial buildings, things that are outside the scope of the housing department, you may still require the inspection, but building and safety would be the authority having jurisdiction over the enforcement of that inspection. Now, what is an exterior elevated element? So we've determined that your property requires the inspection, but do you have the necessary elements to ensure that those elements are inspected or maintained? So let's look at these requirements. Do you have a balcony, deck, porch, walkway, stairway, or entry structure? Does it extend beyond the exterior wall of the building? Does it have a walking surface that is elevated 6 or more feet above ground? Is it designed for human occupancy or use? Does it rely on wood frame construction or wood-based products for structural support? If you said yes to all of these, then you are required to have an inspection under SB 721. Now, you can have wood frame construction with no exterior wood frame elements, but you have interior walkways, interior stairways, you have 3 or more units, but again, it's all within the building envelope. There's nothing on the exterior. You don't need the inspection. This is all about wood frame elements that fall within these categories that extend beyond the exterior wall of the building and are at least 6 feet or more above ground level. So another example, if you have um, at the back of your triplex, you have a deck, but that deck is not more than 6 feet above the ground level, you would not need, and assuming that's the only exterior um, wood frame element, you would not need an inspection under SB 721 in that scenario. So now we'll just go through some examples here. We have a larger apartment complex. Each individual unit has their own balcony that is wood frame, that is at least 6 feet or more from the ground. This would require an inspection under SB 721. Now, when we talk about these exterior elevated elements that are required to be inspected, the state statute says a sample of at least 15% of each type of exterior elevated element shall be inspected. So when you hire your professional to do this inspection, and we'll go through in a second who can conduct this inspection, they are required to tally up the amount and the different types of exterior elevated elements at your property, and they must survey or sample at least 15% of each type. So if I have 100 staircases that fall within the requirement for the inspection, I need 15 of them to be sampled. So 15% of each type of the exterior elevated element shall be inspected. Here's another example. We have 3 or more units, wood frame construction, a balcony walkway that services the upstairs units that would have to be inspected. Now in this scenario, 15%, we have 2 walkways here, so both are going to have to be inspected. We have the staircase here, these would have to be inspected also. We have another staircase. Now, someone asked me a question at a previous webinar that they were told by a design professional or an engineer, a contractor, one of these individuals that is authorized to conduct these inspections, that they have 3 units at their property, an exterior staircase, as we see here, but this exterior staircase only services 1 unit. And they were told by this professional that you do not need the inspection in this scenario. So that is false. If you have a similar situation, it doesn't matter how many units are served by the element, as long as it's attached to that building with 3 or more units, you would still need the inspection. So now who can perform these inspections? It can be a licensed architect, a licensed civil or structural engineer, a building contractor holding any or all of the A, B, or C5 license classifications issued by the Contractor State License Board with a minimum of 5 years experience as a holder of that license and in constructing multi-story wood frame buildings. It could be an individual certified as a building inspector or a building official from a recognized state, national, or international association as determined by the local jurisdiction. However, it cannot be an individual who is employed by the city while performing these inspections. So you have inspectors come to your property for complaint inspections, for systematic inspections through the housing department. The housing department will not be conducting these inspections. We cannot, per the state law. You have to hire one of these licensed professionals to conduct the inspection for you. Just to clarify, A is a general engineering contractor, B, general building contractor, and C5 is a framing and rough framing contractor. So initial and periodic inspections. The inspection shall be completed by January 1st, 2025, and by January 1st, every 6 years thereafter. The inspection of buildings for which a building permit application has been submitted on or after January 1st, 2019 shall occur no later than 6 years following the issuance of a certificate of occupancy. So what does that mean? You have to have this inspection done by January 1st, 2025. And then every 6 years thereafter. So have it done before January 1st, 2025, be in compliance, fix whatever you need to fix according to that report, hold on to that report for your records, and then have it done every 6 years. If you have a newer building, so again, if you have a building built on or after January 1st, 2019, we're going to look at the date of the certificate of occupancy. So if you have a building that was just issued a certificate of occupancy in 2024, the first inspection deadline for you will be January 1st, 2030, every 6 years thereafter also. So after 2019, if you have a newer building, just get the date on your certificate of occupancy, add 6 to it, and then you'll continue every 6 years. So here's a timeline for if you have corrective work that is noted after you have your inspection conducted. So before we go into this, if you have an inspection conducted under SB 721 and your licensed professional gives you the report, he or she doesn't note any corrective work, there's no imminent threats, no emergency actions required, it's all good. You pass the inspection, nothing's required of you at that point. Hold on to the inspection report for your records. Most likely what will happen is come January 1st, 2025, once your property is up for a SCEP inspection, the SCEP inspector is going to ask for a copy of that report to ensure that it was completed. So again, this is subject to change, but most likely that will be the way that it is enforced. So if you got a clean bill of health, you didn't have any corrective work noted on your inspection report, hold on to that, and it could be presented to the housing department inspector at the next SCEP inspection after January 1st, 2025. But now we're in the scenario where you got your report from the licensed professional, and they noted that you have some corrective action to take. So here's the timeline that you will be placed on. And this is all according to the state statute. Right? So after the licensed professional conducts the inspection, they have 45 days to deliver the report to you. So that begins the timeline. The inspection date begins this timeline. Perform the inspection, within 45 days, they give you the report. After you have the report, you have 120 days to obtain permits. Now, when you get your report from the licensed professional, he will note the exterior elevated elements that failed inspection and why they failed the inspection. Inadequate waterproofing or dry rot was observed, or whatever was noted. They will note the corrective work that's necessary and its location. 9 times out of 10, because this is structural related, you will be required to obtain permits from the Department of Building and Safety to correct this work. I saw a report the other day that cited a guardrail, simply tighten down the bolts on the guardrail. Something like that, of course, won't need permits. But if it's structural work, it will always need a permit. If you're replacing framing members, it will always need a permit. If it's building related work, not structural related, so waterproofing, restuccoing, anything of that nature, we'll go back on the rule. If you spend more than $500, then that will trigger the permit requirement. So you get the report, you have 120 days to get the permits. You got your permit. Most likely it will be the contractor that gets the permit for you, unless you're pulling an owner builder permit. So now you have your permit. From the day that you get your permit, you have 120 days to complete the repairs. After 120 days, the licensed professional has 60 days to inform the Los Angeles Housing Department that you did not comply with the noted repairs that were necessary. This is only for corrective work we're looking at. So essentially, after you obtain the permit, you have 180 days before that licensed professional informs us that you didn't finish the work that was necessary. If after 180 days you finish that work, then we're back in that first scenario where you passed your inspection. You don't need to send anything to the housing department. Your contractor or whoever performed the inspection doesn't have to send anything to the housing department. Once you fixed everything within this timeline, just hold on to that report for your records. Now, worst case scenario, after this 180 days, you haven't finished yet. So that licensed professional is required to notify the housing department. He or she will notify us. We have our website. If you just Google LAHD E3, it will bring you to the website, and there's a Google form on there where this licensed professional can submit this report. But they can also just file a complaint by contacting the hotline or through the housing department's website, and they can say, which is the way most of them are doing it. They file a complaint saying that you failed to comply with the SB 721 inspection repairs that were deemed necessary. So once we receive that complaint, we will schedule an inspection. As a complaint inspection, we'll go out there and we're referencing the licensed professional's report. We'll go out there and cite whatever you failed to comply with. So let's say there were 10 areas that you needed to fix. You fixed 6 of them. You need to do some waterproofing on some balconies. We will cite whatever's remaining, but we're referencing that licensed professional's report. We will cite all the remaining violations on an order to comply. So we'll issue the NTC at that point. When we issue the NTC, we give you 30 days before the reinspection, so we can deem if you're in compliance at that point. So if you completed the work at that point, after the NTC was issued and we come back for the reinspection after 30 days, then we'll close the case if everything's fixed. We're back in that initial scenario, just hold on to the report. Any permit records, hold on to all that for your records. Now, if you didn't finish at that point, after the 30 days after the order was issued, we have 2 paths of enforcement. One is the typical path of enforcement that our orders take. So if you've ever been cited on a SCEP inspection or a complaint inspection, the order to comply, as I stated during the SCEP and complaint process, if there's not compliance, ultimately that will go through the hearings to determine a potential rent reduction or forwarding the case to the city attorney for prosecution. So we will begin down that path. We can also grant you an extension. If you're working on it, we see you have permits. Like I said, if there's, when I was reviewing the SCEP and complaint process, if there's substantial progress, then we can grant an extension. So that's one path. However, the state statute orders the local jurisdictions to install a civil penalty if you're not in compliance after this 30 days. So, and it's a per day penalty. So just keep that in mind. So although you may get an extension on going to a hearing, you will still be fined per day potentially for each day that you're not in compliance. Okay, so now you've received a report stating not corrective action, but an emergency condition exists. So whenever a report notes an emergency condition, the licensed professional, per the state statute, has to deliver the report to the owner and to the housing department, within 15 days. So they noted an emergency condition, they'll send the report within 15 days. That will trigger LHD scheduling an inspection at that point. So the state statute also says, however, if imminent threats are noted or emergency conditions are noted in this report, as long as you remove the imminent threat, perhaps you set up some shoring under a balcony that's failing, you block off access to a particular balcony that was noted with an emergency condition, then you could go back on the standard timeline for the corrective work. However, you have to remove that imminent threat. So we'll go out there, we'll set up the complaint inspection and determine if you remove that imminent threat. And again, we're referencing the licensed professional's report. If you eliminated if you did not remove the imminent threat, we will issue a substandard order on the property. And then after that substandard order, we'll come back. We could do a shortened order, 15 days, most likely it will be 30 days. We'll come back and determine if you're in compliance at that point. And if you're not, then you'll go straight to enforcement through the hearing process, as explained earlier, or the administrative fine per day. But again, as long as you've eliminated that imminent threat, then you will go back on the standard timeline. You have 120 days after the report. You got the report to obtain your permit, essentially 180 days after you get your permit to complete the work. And then if you haven't, then we'll evaluate where you're at and then issue a standard order to comply at that point. But if you ever get a report that notes emergency conditions, eliminate the imminent threat as soon as possible. Place up shoring, block off access. Now, if you have, let me just go back here, a walkway, as in this scenario, you wouldn't be able to block off access in this scenario, right? Because these tenants need to have access to go in and out of their unit. So that's not possible. But you would be able to shore this up, as I'll show you in an example here. So just discuss your options with your design professional. If they're not providing you with the remedy, then reach out to a contractor who can complete the work, how fast you can eliminate the imminent threat. So this is an example of what I was discussing. This balcony was noted with an emergency condition. So in order to be in compliance with at least eliminating the threat, the owner set up some temporary shoring. So just a recap now of SB 721. The owner of the building is responsible for complying with the requirements of the law. So the owner of the building is responsible for finding a licensed professional, one of the individuals I stated who can perform the inspection. It's your responsibility to find someone to conduct this inspection for you. The continued and ongoing maintenance of the exterior elevated elements in a safe and functional condition in compliance with these provisions shall be the responsibility of the owner. As with all portions of your building, it will be your responsibility to ensure it's maintained. This inspection requirement is triggered when you have a building with 3 or more units that has an exterior elevated element, and the inspection must be conducted by a licensed professional, an architect, an engineer, or one of the certified contractors. The deadline to do this inspection is by January 1st of 2025. January 1st, 2025, exceptions apply depending on when the certificate of occupancy of your building was issued. If it's after 2019, at 6 years from the issuance of your certificate of occupancy, and then begin every 6 years thereafter. But it will always be January 1st every 6 years. The governing body of any city, county, or city and county may enact ordinances or laws imposing requirements greater than those imposed by this law. What that means in short is the city is authorized to supplement the state statute. If we haven't done so yet, we're simply working off the state statute, but should city council pass an additional ordinance to supplement this law, they have the authority to do so.